Hi and welcome to another gaming video, and in today's video I'm going to tell you that I have removed custom firmware from my Nintendo DSi LL, which is my Japanese XL. Now, why have I removed custom firmware? Because custom firmware is great. All you do is you pop a SD card in the SD card slot, install the custom firmware, and then it means you can run all of your games from the SD card, as well as other games for things like Game Boy, Game Boy Color, NES, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, Master System, Game Boy Advance. I'm sure there's a few others as well. And you can run them all from one little card in the side there. So why have I removed custom firmware? Well, it's great. I like Twilight Menu, but it does remove some of the functionality of the DSi itself, and it changes the menu altogether. So I didn't really think about it too much until I picked up this little DSi a few days ago. This is my Japanese DSi. I booted it up, and I then remembered what the system menu actually looks like. So it's quite a nice little menu. You've got your you've got your system settings there, and access to the camera and the sound app and DS download play. And then I sat there thinking, well, I haven't got any of that on my DSi LL. Twilight Menu completely takes over the system, and you can get Twilight Menu, there's different themes on Twilight Menu, and you can get to mimic the original DSi sort of software look, but it isn't the same, and you do lose some functionality. So the sound app has gone, and then one thing that I never really thought of is you can't access the camera if you run on Twilight Menu. Now, somebody please correct me if this is a huge oversight of mine, but I couldn't find anywhere of launching the camera or installing an app to access the camera. So if you run on custom firmware on, well, either a DSi or a DSi LL XL, then you may lose functionality to the camera. And I like the DSi menu. I like the way it's set up. It's quite nice and simple. Not so much with Twilight Menu. It took me about 2 months to work out that you could get rid of that splash screen that comes up, because that took ages to boot up. But even then, you just lose some of the functionality from the DS. And I sat and thought about it, and I thought, well, what do I do on my DSi LL that requires custom firmware? Nothing. I play DS games. You can do that with a flash cart. I play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. You can do that on a flash cart. And I play Game Boy Advance games. You can just about do that on a flash cart. So why did I need to install custom firmware? Why couldn't I just use like an R4 card like this instead? And that's what I've just done. So yes, there are lots of things that you can do on a modded or DSi running custom firmware that you probably can't do on a flash cart. But I looked at the things I would use one for, and there isn't. So I play my DS games, can do that. I play my Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, I do that. And I occasionally dip into Game Boy Advance games, I do that. So for DS games, you just load them straight onto your R4 card. For the Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, I use an app called Lane Boy. Absolutely fantastic. It's got the similar functionality to whatever emulator they're using on Twilight Menu, but I think I actually prefer Lane Boy. One small feature, and it's a very small and quite a stupid feature, is that you can turn Game Boy games and give it that greenish kind of tinge to the screen, which I couldn't find in Twilight Menu, and I really like it. I like to play Game Boy games as close to sort of Game Boy Color as possible, so you can do that in Lane Boy. I like that. GBA Runner 2, which is also built into the custom firmware or Twilight Menu of a DSi, you can run that on a flash cart. It's not as great. So GBA Runner 2 is for Game Boy Advance games. It will run, and personally I've not had any issues with games, but apparently not all of the games will run properly running from a flash card. I just don't know why, but like I said, I've not come into any issues. So those are the 4 systems that I run on my DSi: DS, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance. I can run all of those from a flash cart. You can also run homebrew games if you can find them for the DS, and you can also run some of the sort of ROM hacks that I've come across, like newer Super Mario Bros. And there is a early sort of test port of Super Mario Galaxy DS. Now that one won't run from a flash cart, no matter what I've tried and whatever system I've used it on, it won't run from a flash cart, but it does run on custom firmware. So there are some limitations to using a flash cart, but for me, well, it's all I need. And I like flash carts because I can pop this in here and use it, and then I can take it out and I can put it in this one and carry on. So all of your saved games from whatever system you're running are saved on here. So if your console was to ever break, well, you can just switch to another one, and I quite like that. Whereas custom firmware, everything is tied into this machine. I run custom firmware on my 3DS. That's a completely different system. It doesn't change the menu, it doesn't change how the 3DS looks, it just adds lots of extra icons, etc. But everything is tied to my 3DS, and if it was to ever break or get stolen or I lose it, then I've lost everything. Whereas this is my DSi LL, this is my flash cart. Now the paranoid side of me never keeps them together, so I don't store this in the machine, so I could lose either one of them and I'd still have the other. And like I said, the big bonus is that I can pop this in here and it pops up, or I can just take it out and pop it in this one instead and carry on exactly where I was. There we go. And that is the great thing about flash carts, is that you can just take it from machine to machine, whether that's your machine or someone else's, and you can just take them out and swap them around. I have a different one here which I use in another machine, and I can just pop that in as well. And then if I fancied using that in my DSi, I could just pop that in there. And it's great. That is what I like about flash cards. Everything is stored on this. All of your games, all of your saves, and you can move them from machine to machine. And that is the biggest bonus. And I just sat there and thought, well, I like the functionality of the DSi itself. So this is my DSi LL. There's my system settings, my camera, my sound app, all the other things. Download play. One of those is download play. And with my DSi LL, I've even got some foreign games pre-installed. These actually come on the system. Yeah, that is the reason I like flash carts over custom firmware. And not all of the time. I've got custom firmware running on my, well, I had it on my PSP, I've got it on my PS Vita, I've got it on my 3DS. I'm just not massively keen on the way that the DSi handles custom firmware. Twilight menu is great, but it just changes everything on the system, and I don't like that. So perhaps I've misjudged. Perhaps there is a way of installing custom firmware but keeping that DSi system menu. If there is, please tell me and I will look into it. But for now, and well, I'm going to keep these two machines with stock and a flash card. And it really did come about when I bought this recently and realised just how nice the stock firmware is, and everything I need I can do on a flash card. So there you go, that is the reason I have uninstalled custom firmware on my DSi LL, and that is the reason I won't be installing custom firmware on my DSi that I've just picked up. So like, subscribe, enjoy.